James and Rosemary Green had an illustrious career of ministry for over 65 fruitful years. Hailing from Canton, Illinois, Rosemary Arnett met Jim Green, a native of Evansville, Indiana, while a student at Olivet Nazarene College. 2 years later, they were married and made the decision to enter the field of song evangelism full-time in the Church of the Nazarene. Thus began a lifetime of service to God, the gospel, and the church, which quickly recognized Jim and Rosemary as favorites and over the years endeared them to many hundreds of people. Rosie, as she is affectionately known by family and close friends, became known as the foremost camp meeting and revival pianist and organist in the church. Jim's gift was best demonstrated when he organized and led great camp meeting and convention choirs with uncontainable energy. Many still remember the countless times the Spirit would bless a particular choir song, and Jim would shout out, "Let's sing that just one more time," as he would remove his suit coat and fling it across the platform. God used them on 6 different continents to exalt the name of Christ as they ushered great crusade and camp meeting congregations into a connection with the Almighty through anointed worship. And now, in that same spirit, we welcome you to the Neil Strait Tabernacle on the grounds of Indian Lake Nazarene Camp in Vicksburg, Michigan, where we have gathered to recognize Jim and Rosemary Green's monumental contribution to the Church of the Nazarene and, to a greater extent, the kingdom of Almighty God. Let's join together to worship their Lord and ours in spirit and in truth.
Some of my earliest memories of Uncle Jim and Aunt Rosie were family get-togethers, especially whenever they were going to be in revival at home church in Newcastle, Indiana, and they always stayed at our home. And also, whenever my parents and I would have the opportunity to visit camp meetings, general assemblies, revivals, where Aunt Rose and Uncle Jim were there and leading the singing, and it was just overwhelming. And as my childhood, as I grew on up into my teenage years and my adulthood, and my heart's desire was to reach out and to go into evangelism as Aunt Rose and Uncle Jim. And over the years, after so many years, the Lord opened that door. And I just am so blessed. And my heart, it just overfloods with joy that I could be, through God's hand, blessed with such a wonderful family heritage and have a wonderful aunt and uncle who touched so many lives around the world. Mostly, they touched my life. And for their love for Christ and their love for others. And all they wanted was to reach others and tell others through song, through their ministry, of God's love. How wonderful it is to be able to share with you and to have you a part of this time, this tribute to my wonderful Uncle Jim and Aunt Rosie.
We are glad that you have come this evening, and we had hoped and had every plan to make it possible. Of course, Jim has gone on to heaven a couple of years ago, but Rosemary still lives in Canton, Illinois. We're going to make every effort for her to be here in person tonight. Her medical advisors told us that was not a good idea, and that it would just be so stressful on her physically that it would not be a good idea. So we did the next best thing. We made a trip to Canton, Illinois, where she lives. And we asked her to sit down to a beautiful Yamaha piano, much like we have in the tabernacle tonight, and to play some of the great songs that she so well was remembered for. One of the great songs that the Greens led congregations in across the country and probably around the world was the great hymn of the church, "How Firm a Foundation, Ye Saints of the Lord, is laid for your faith in His excellent word." We asked Rosemary to sit down to that piano and play an introduction and lead you, the congregation, tonight in singing that great hymn of the church. Would you stand with the choir tonight and sing with us as Rosemary plays for us on video?
Your met this blessed Savior, and since he cleansed and made me whole, I will never cease to praise him. I'll shout it while eternity rolls, because he touched me. Oh, he touched me. And oh, the joy that fills my soul. Something happened, and now I know he touched me and made me whole. He touched me, oh, he touched me, and oh, the joy that floods my soul. Something happened, and now I know he touched me and made me whole. Something happened, and now I know he touched me
It was my privilege to be a part of the ministry of Jim and Rosemary Green. My late husband, evangelist Jim Crabtree, and I had the opportunity to be in many revivals and camp meetings with them through the years. Jim Green was a master at directing a choir and congregational singing, as you have seen on the screen. And Rosie was a wonderful pianist and organist, and they were such a team. They really have not been duplicated to this day. We first knew them in the late 50s after we came from Olivet and entered the field of evangelism. And we knew them for probably 60 years and were involved with them. Our last time together before my Jim went to heaven was in the late 90s when we toured the Illinois district with them. Jim Green and I always sang Down from His Glory. That was kind of our sugar stick. We made an album. It did not make the top 10. But it was a wonderful memory, and I still have that album. May God bless Rosie and the memory of Jim. And I have asked Gary Bond to sing this song with me in memory of them.
Down from his glory, ever-living story, my God and Savior came, and Jesus was his name, born in a manger, to his own a stranger, a man of sorrows, tears, and agony. Oh, how I love him, how I adore him, my breath, my smile, flesh and blood his substance. He took the form of man, revealed the hidden plan. Oh, glorious mystery, sacrifice of Calvary. And now I know thou art the great I am. Oh, how I love him, how I adore him. My breath, my sunshine, my all in all, the great Creator became my Savior, and all God's fullness dwelleth in him.
When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul.
My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought, that my sin, not in part, but the whole, has been nailed to the cross. Now I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, oh my soul.
It is well, with my soul.
With my soul, it is well, it is well with my soul. And Lord, haste the day when the faith shall be sight, the clouds be rolled back as a scroll. The trump shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul. It is well, it is well with my
Lord, I come to you today with a simple prayer to pray. In everything I do, let my life, oh Lord, praise you, praise you, praise you. Let my life praise you, praise you, praise you. Let my life, oh Lord, praise you. Lord, you formed me out of clay, and for your glory I was made. Use this vessel as you choose, and let my life, oh Lord, praise you, praise you, praise you. Let my life praise you, praise you, praise you. Let my life, oh Lord, praise you. Let my life, oh Lord, praise you.
I started, my aunt was an evangelist and singer, and I traveled with her when in my teens. And then I went to Olivet College in Kankakee, or Rabones, and I met my husband there. He was going to sing a solo, and he wanted me to play for him. We had never gone together till then. So I guess during that practice time and everything, that got us together from then on. He worked with choirs a lot, and he was the soloist, and I mean, you know, if we wanted to use a solo, he was the one. And we sang duets some, but I'd rather sit here and play the piano than sing. We traveled, I really don't know how many years. We've been everywhere. We've been all over the world, really.
Jesus proved his love on Calvary one day, and aren't you glad that his love lifted you and me so it is so familiar Everybody join and sing that chorus now. Lord lifted me, love lifted me when nothing else could have. Love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me when nothing else could have. Tried the verse I was singing deep. It said, but the people strawberry deeply stained with deep singing to rise the Lord. But the master of the sea heard my despair. I am from the one who lifted me. Now say,
It was in 1968, 44 years ago, that I held my first revival with Jim and Rosemary Green. I had just graduated from Olivet. It was in December, and I graduated early. Bev and I and our daughter Debbie had moved to Indian Lake, where we were going to live through the spring and summer before I enrolled at Nazarene Theological Seminary. I knew Jim and Rosemary Green. They were members of Newcastle First Church on the Indianapolis district. I'd heard them sing at Olivet Nazarene College at that time before, but had never really been around them. But the very first night, we just bonded. We went out to eat afterwards, and we laughed half the night and talked and swapped stories, and I asked him many, many questions about the field of evangelism. On Wednesday, he received a telephone call from a pastor in Dayton, Ohio, Dayton Parkview. His name was Austin Wright. And Austin had said to him, he said, Jim, you know, he said, in 2 weeks we start a revival with you. And he said, I've got a problem. He said, my evangelist just called and is canceled. Do you have anybody you can recommend to come with you? Jim said, I sure do. He said, we're working with a young man now, just graduated from Olivet by the name of Ted Lee. Austin Wright said, where's he from? He said, he's from Indianapolis. And Austin said, is he a radical? And Jim thought he said, is he a rascal? And Jim said, oh, he's a rascal, all right, but you'll really like him. Oh, he said, I didn't say rascal, I said radical. And Jim said, oh, no, he just believes in old-time religion. So from that time on, that started a relationship down through these years till I preached Jim Green's funeral 2.5 years ago when God took him to heaven. We have traveled together, my wife and I, and Bev was with me as much as she could be. We have held revivals together from California to Maine and every place in between. Probably the highlight that I had with Jim and Rosemary is when Bev and I and our daughter Debbie, who was about 14 years of age at that time, went to South Africa to hold crusades. We were in Cape Town, we were in Durban, we were in Johannesburg, and I wondered how Jim would connect with those people, and we arrived in Cape Town the first night, and a huge crowd and those beautiful black faces. And when Jim started singing with that choir that night, Pentecostal fire is falling, he had that crowd in the palm of his hand. I remember during that trip, and Jim and Rosemary, they knew every chorus, they knew every song, but we learned 2 new songs while we were in Africa, and Jim and Rosemary used those the rest of the time while they were still traveling in the field of evangelism. I remember the first one was entitled, "He is More Than Just a Superstar to Me," and Jim and Rosemary loved that chorus. The second one, "All Over the World, the Spirit of the Lord is Moving." We were in Brazil together, we were in Rome together, we were in Hawaii several times to hold revivals and camp meetings, and Jim Green taught me so much in how to deal with people and people skills. I've watched him lead choirs in General Assembly of the Church of the Nazarene, as well as small churches across this country. And whether it was General Assembly or just a local church, he made that choir feel like they were absolutely the best. I remember several times when Beverly was not with me, and we had been a local church, and it would be the first night, and the choir was pitiful, and there were not many in the choir. And I would say to myself, maybe this will be the week that Jim will ask me to join the choir. In all the years we traveled, he never one time, regardless of how pitiful it was, he never asked me to be in one of his choirs. But I told him many times, one of these days, Jim Green, you can't keep me out of the choir. I'm going to be in a choir one of these days, whether I can sing or whether I cannot. Oh, I have so many stories. When we went to Europe and went to Africa, and we were in London, England, and the plane was getting ready to leave, and Jim Green was nowhere to be found. He loved just to wander around. He'd stay up late at night. He'd be the first one up in the morning, beating on my door, wanting to go get coffee. I wanted to sleep, but he was waking me up early in the morning. But that day at the London airport, they kept announcing the plane, and we were leaving for Johannesburg, South Africa, and they announced the departure 3 or 4 different times. And so I went to the gate attendant, and I said, we've got a person missing. And he said, well, I will announce one more time, and if he's not here within 5 minutes after we make the final announcement, then we'll just have to go on. We cannot keep this plane waiting. I'll never forget Rosemary. She was pacing back and forth, and they announced over the loudspeaker, Jim Green, your plane is leaving. Come to the gate right now. And finally I looked up, and here he came, sombering down the walkway like he didn't have a care in the world. And boy, when he got there, did Rosemary, never heard it before in my life, did she lay into him. I mean, she looked at him and put her finger in his face and said, James Burzee, don't you leave anymore. We can't trust you. And never will forget that. One time we were holding a revival together in Conway, Arkansas. It was on a Friday night. Following the service, we went out to have a bite to eat, and we had a men's prayer breakfast the next morning, and so I wanted to get back to the room, but we didn't get back to the room till about 11 p.m. that night. And about 11:45, I was in bed and just kind of in that twilight zone, and I heard a car screeching its tires and come roaring into the hotel, the motel there in Conway. And evidently they didn't realize it, but there was a retaining wall, and they hit that wall, and their tires got caught on the other side of the wall, and they couldn't get out. And I was the 4th room down, and they began to beat on the first door, and nobody evidently came to the door. They went to the 2nd room and knocked on that door, and nobody came. So I got on the telephone and called the office, and I said, "We've got a disturbance here." I said, "Something's going on. They're beating on the doors." And I said, "You need to get the police out here." And the guy said, "Oh, it's all right." He said, "We've had other calls." And he said, "I'll take care of it." Well, they got to the third door and beat on that door, and nothing happened, and evidently nobody was in that room. And then they got to my door. They beat on my door. I stayed in bed. They beat on the door some more, and then it got real quiet. And about that time I heard kaboom, and they shot a bullet in my door. I got on the telephone and I said to the manager, "Get somebody out here. They've just shot my pajamas off." And they left my door and they went down to the fifth door where Jim and Rosie were and knocked on that door. And Jim did not go to the door, but I looked out the window and they went over to old Jim's Cadillac that had 200,000 miles on it. And I saw that one of the men take out a pistol and he shot the window out of Jim Green's car. And about that time, Jim Green opened the door and hollered, "Get away from that car! Get away from that car! Get away from that car!" People fell out of bed. You could hear them all over the motel. Then the police came and put handcuffs on them, and we got brave, and Rosemary came out in the parking lot in her gown, and I came out in my pajamas, and the sheriff was there, and they had a rap sheet, he said, "as long as your arm." Well, the next day in the Conway paper, there was an article, a 2-column article about this incident, and they had Jim Green's name and said they shot his window out of his car. I said, "Jim Green, that's great. They shoot your window out with an old Cadillac with 200,000 miles. They shoot my pajamas off. I don't even get my name in the newspaper." And that's the kind of relationship that Jim and I had down through the many, many years. I remember the last revival I held with Jim and Rosemary was about 7 years ago. The years had taken a toll on Jim. The thousands upon thousands upon thousands of miles that they had driven from one coast to the other had taken a toll. But when Rosemary got on that piano and that organ and began to play "Pentecostal Fire is Falling," Jim came alive. And what a time we had in our last revival together. I remember before Jim passed away, and Bev and I drove over to Canton, Illinois, and Jim was in the hospital, and I wanted to see him one more time. We walked in that room, and his eyes lit up, and he looked at me, and he said, "Ted, I'm so glad to see you. What in the world are we going to do with the church? What's wrong with this church of ours?" And all he wanted to talk about was the church. And he said to me, he said, "Get me out of bed. I want to sit in the chair over there." No, I said, "Jim, I can't do that." I said, "You got to stay here in bed." And so Beverly got another pillow and tried to lift his head up. And he didn't like that, and he hollered for the nurse. And she went by, and he said, "Nurse, nurse, get in here." She came in. He said, "Help me out of this bed." He said, "This is my close friend, Ted Lee." And he said, "I want to be in this chair. We want to talk a while." Oh, she said, "Mr. Green, I can't do that." He said, "You can do that, and you will do that." And she did do that and got him out and put him in that chair. And we laughed and we talked and we swapped stories. And when we prayed together when I left, I said, "Jim, we have been all over the world together. You have taught me so much. And if I never see you anymore on this earth, well, I want to see you someday on the other side." And I'm so glad I know when I preach Jim Green's funeral, I don't have to wonder where he is. He's with the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And he traveled this country, he and Rosie, for 65 years, singing the unsearchable riches of God. 2 weeks ago, Bev and I drove back to Canton and spent a couple of hours with Rosemary and the assisted living where she is. And what a beautiful, beautiful lady. And we laughed and we told stories and we talked about Jim and we talked about a lot of you evangelists evangelists that are here this week, and she walked us downstairs, and we prayed together. And I am glad tonight that we can honor a wonderful couple that literally have given their life to God and to the church. And that's why I want to go to heaven, ladies and gentlemen, because of people like Jim and Rosemary Green. And we won't be there for a day, a month, or year, but we'll be there forever and forever and forever. And the Pentecostal fire will fall, and we will worship at the throne of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I'm convinced, even as great as it's going to be, with the angels folding their wings, sometime in that great heavenly choir, we're going to hear Rosemary Green on the organ and Jim Green leading that choir, and I intend to be there.
Things of earth will dim and lose their value if we recall they're borrowed for a while, and things of earth that cause the heart to tremble, there will only bring a smile.
This weary world, with all its toil and struggle, may take its toll of misery and strife. The soul of man is like a waiting
This is a wonderful time for us to start thinking about what it really is that we're celebrating tonight. We're celebrating more than the life of two wonderful people. We're celebrating the faithfulness of God as He used them for His honor and His glory, as He used them in helping to enrich the church and enhance the kingdom with their work over those many years. I think you want to join us in singing Fanny Crosby's great hymn of praise. To God be the glory, great things He hath done. Would you stand and sing with us that great song together? To God be the glory, great things He hath done. So lovely the world that He gave us His Son. To yield His life and atonement for sin, and open the wide gate that all may go in. Praise the Lord, let the earth hear
And when I think how God, His Son not sparing, sent Him to die, I scarce can take it in that on the cross my burden gladly bearing, He bled and died to take away my sin. Then sings my soul, my Savior God to Thee. How great Thou art! How great Thou art! How great Thou art! Then sings my soul, my Savior God to Thee. How great Thou Everybody join and sing. Then sing